The final core operation that we can perform on an object is movement, more formally known as object translation. We can move the selected item using the Move tool shown in the toolbar. Selecting this option creates a Move gizmo centered on the object's origin. This tool is similar in appearance to the one we saw in the scaling video with 3 lines and 3 squares, but this time we have a single white circle. The axes displayed by the gizmo depends on the axes set currently specified in the Transform Orientation field. So, if the object has been previously rotated causing the local axis to point in a different direction from the global axes, we can see that the Move gizmo lines change to match the selected axis set. Dragging on a line moves the object along that axis. If we drag on one of the colored squares in the gizmo, the object will move in 2 directions but not in the one corresponding to the color of the box. We can achieve the same effect by holding down the Shift key while dragging on a line. The line's color determines which dimension has no movement. In this case it's the X direction. Dragging within the white circle gives us free movement in all 3 directions. The distance moved along each direction is displayed in the top left of the 3D viewport along with the axis set being used. Note that the axis detail is missing when dragging within the white circle. If the snapping snap to is set to the increment, which is the default setting, holding down the Control key restricts movement to discrete increments. In fact, what we are doing here by holding down the Control key is temporarily switching on snapping. Depending on the resolution of the grid displayed in the 3D viewport, the step size may be 1 meter or 0.1 meters. If the Shift key is later added to the held down keys, the step size is reduced to 1/10 of its earlier value. Bypassing the Move gizmo, we can also activate movement by pressing the G key. Note that unlike Rotate and Scale where we use the first letter of the verb as our shortcut, we don't use M for the move operation. Often people use the term grab to remind themselves that it's the G key that activates movement. If we use this keyboard option, simply moving the mouse will also move the object. There's no need to press any of the mouse buttons. However, it can be rather difficult to accurately judge how the object is moving in 3D space when we start from an unnamed user viewpoint. One method of controlling this is to hold down the middle mouse button. This highlights the 3 axes lines. Which axis set is displayed depends on the Transform Orientation setting. With the middle mouse button still held down, drag along one of these lines for a short distance and then release the mouse button. The move will then remain restricted to movement on the selected axis. Another option for gaining more control over the direction of movement is to jump to a named viewpoint such as front, right, or top. This restricts movement to 2 global dimensions only. The object can't move in the direction pointing out of the screen. For the front view, that means there can be no movement in the Y direction. But there is an alternative way of making sure we move in only 2 of the dimensions without having to change to a named viewpoint. By pressing G then holding down the Shift key and pressing the letter for the direction we don't want to move in, we restrict movement to the other 2 dimensions. Another aid to movement involves pressing Ctrl-Alt-Q. This splits the viewport into quarters. We can then work in the quarter most appropriate to our requirements. For example, we can see here how to use this layout to position a cone over a cylinder. Pressing the same key combination will return us to a single viewpoint. We can also change our viewpoint during the move operation. To do this, hold down the Alt key and the middle mouse button. We can then drag the mouse to orbit the center of the viewport. When we release the Alt key and middle mouse button, the move operation will continue. Press the left mouse or the Enter key to finalize the move or the right mouse button or the Escape key to undo the move. To drag the object along a particular direction, follow the G key with the direction letter, X, Y, or Z. Of course, the axes set used is determined by the transform orientation setting. So, if the selected object has been rotated and we switch to the local axes, the axes letters will create movement in new directions when compared to the global axes. By pressing the direction key twice, movement will be along the global axis. This assumes the transform orientation is currently set to a value other than global. If it is set to global, the double letter press will result in the local axis being used. An actual distance can be specified either before or after the direction letter. The distance can be negative with the minus sign entered either before or after the number. Pressing the minus key more than once is equivalent to multiplying the already specified distance by -1, making the move change to the opposite direction. Press the Enter key to finalize the move or Escape to undo it. The last ops panel can be used to specify the exact distance moved along each axis. We are also free to change which axis set the object is to move along, changing from the one previously defined in the transform orientation if required. Other options in the panel can be ignored. If we have selected multiple objects, all objects move in the same direction when the global axes are being used. But along individual directions when local axes are specified. When we want to move an object to an exact location, one way of doing this is to display the sidebar by pressing the N key and then, in the item page, enter the required coordinates in the location fields. These fields specify the world coordinates to which the object is to be moved. However, we should remember that an object is moved so that its origin ends up at the specified location. If we've previously moved the position of the origin, this will affect the exact space the object occupies. Yet another way to control movement is to press Shift-S to display a pie menu. We've seen this menu before in a previous video when we used some of the options to control the position of the 3D cursor. The remaining menu options allow us to control the movement of selected objects. The first of these is Selection to Cursor, which moves the selected object so that its origin is centered on the 3D cursor. If more than one object is selected, the objects are likely to overlap when using this option. When we want the multiple objects to remain apart, we can use the Select to Cursor, Keep Offset option. This places the midpoint of the selected objects over the 3D cursor with the objects themselves remaining separated from each other. Selection to Grid moves the selected object to the nearest whole number coordinates. We can see this if we watch the location fields change in the sidebar. If several items are selected when we use this option, each object will be repositioned. The last menu option related to object movement should be used when multiple objects are selected. Selection to Active moves all of the objects to the same coordinates of the active object. Finally, to undo all movement and return an object to the world origin, press Alt-G.